First of all, we need to address this idea of lactic acid, and especially within a human, okay? You cannot get your pH low enough in the physiological environment of a human to create lactic acid. So within a human, lactic acid does not exist. So the whole idea of, well, we need to get rid of lactic acid, or the burn you feel, it's a lactic acid. Oh, I'm sore because of buildup of lactic acid. There's no lactic acid anywhere. It doesn't exist. Not within you as a human being, okay? So we can move past that. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we are coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset. Your health is one of the biggest influencers of the quality and quantity of time that you have. And while there are many aspects of health, our expertise is exercise. Exercise has been proven time and again to not only improve your health, but also increase your longevity and improve your quality of life. And if you are looking for trainer quality workouts in the comfort of your own home that can be done in under 20 minutes with minimal equipment, then you need to check out our at-home workout program. This program was designed to help people exercise regardless of their fitness level, regardless of what biomechanical issues they may be experiencing, and exercise not only once a week or twice a week, but every single day on a consistent basis for the foreseeable future. So we have included over 100 workouts in this 75-day video-guided workout program that include resistance training, cardio, mobility workshops, and recovery sessions. So if this is something that you're interested in, to learn more and download your copy today, go to homeworkout.matschaumburg.com. Now today we're discussing an exercise-related topic, or maybe it's more of a fitness industry topic. And this was a question that was sent in from one of our colleagues in Georgia, and she was asking about foam rolling and wanted to get our thoughts on foam rolling so she could help talk to her clients and people in her community about foam rolling, pros and cons, and just kind of give them more information. Because I think one thing about the fitness industry right now is kind of blanketly accepted that, well, foam rolling's a good thing. We foam roll beforehand, we foam roll afterwards, we foam roll on our off days, we just foam roll. Just kind of like stretching is or stretching was, it's one of those things that's like, all right, well, if some is good, more must be better. But actually here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we don't have a single foam roller. And so we want to talk to you a little bit about this, about our viewpoints on it, about what the research says, or at least some of the research. The research is a very broad term. We didn't look up every single paper, but we looked up a bunch and just kind of talked to you about what foam rolling may or may not be doing to you physiologically and where it might fit in.
I don't know about you, but have you noticed, if you've been, kind of aware of the fitness industry, we are trendy, and some trends stick around for a really long time. Things like spinning, the cycle bike, and things like stretching or foam rolling. These are like trends that come up and they kind of stick around for a little while, and they kind of claim these new, awesome benefits. But as always, Charlie and I like to talk about like what it is, not just like, oh, is it good or is it bad? And I have to say, foam rolling is definitely newer. I remember I thought I was like pretty groundbreaking with foam rolling when I was foam rolling in college, which is, I don't know, was that like 12 years ago, 10 years ago?
Well, it depends on when in college. College isn't a single year thing. But
that's true. In the very beginning, what I started in
fall of
2009.
Yep.
Yeah, so 2009. Okay, so yeah, so 10 years ago, I was pretty much groundbreaking. I felt amazing that I was going to do foam rolling because, I got all the new and upcoming stuff. Anyways, I can tell you from firsthand, there's some interesting stuff that go along with foam rolling. Number one, you have to be pretty agile to do it, because you're like rolling all over the ground. Literally using the ground for your foam roller. So you have to be able to get up and off the ground. Plus, it's it's very painful. So you also have to have like this pretty decent pain tolerance, or you have to tell yourself a story of what amazing things are happening so that you can tolerate the pain and discomfort. But it is definitely a newer trend, definitely way newer than stretching. But we really need to talk about what is happening, what we do know, what we don't know, what people think is happening, because oftentimes fitness people will talk about, and I think the fitness world, and I'm sure there's other worlds, but we're pretty much aware of the fitness world since that's our world. People are really quick to make claims about like positives, benefits, negatives of certain things. And it's not really usually coming from research-based information. And I don't want to say that research is the end all be all, because we are going to talk about some catches that go along with research, but there is some interesting information from research that does talk about foam rolling that we never ever hear about from the fitness gurus that are saying you should be foam rolling every day. So that's what we're hoping to kind of talk about. And this is a conversation, not like remember, it's not a good or a bad thing. We're just trying to talk about the info around foam rolling.
So I think some of the more common reasons why people foam roll is, one, they'll say, oh, it improves blood flow. Another one that they might say is it improves their ability to recover. And something that often comes alongside that is the idea of like removing lactic acid, which we need to talk about because that can't exist. But anyways, we'll get to that. Spoiler alert. All right. So another one is people say, well, it improves their range of motion or their joint mobility. So they also might say, well, it loosens up their muscles, or in particular their fascia. They might be talking about their fascia, like their IT band, or sometimes, if they're using a denser thing than a foam roll, or a foam roller, I guess would be the appropriate terminology. They might be using like a lacrosse ball or something, so they'll talk about their plantar fascia, and then they're going to loosen that up or whatnot. And so we want to talk about those points, and then we want to talk about what foam rolling might be doing and where it might fit in, why you might where you might incorporate it, and what some legitimate reasons might be for incorporating it. So I guess before we dive in, I think, I just want to reiterate the point that Julie made, because it's a really good point. This is not going to be a good or bad conversation. This isn't a bashing thing. What we're going to be doing is we are going to be just kind of logically working through those four main arguments: the blood flow, the recovery bit, and the lactic acid bit, the improving joint motion, and then, the changing the fascia. So just kind of talking about those four things. And, full disclaimer, in all fairness, I was totally team foam rolling, just like you were. I mean, in college, all the time. And, when I got out of college, I got, all the toys. I got out of it.
We still have them.
We still have them. That's true. But I got out of it before like foam rolling became a super profitable thing, where you had the, like, what's it called? Like the vibrating foam rollers and the foam rollers with all the little stubs on them and stuff, like, the little knobby things. Mm-hmm. I got out of it before those became a thing. But, I remember going to Ace Hardware, and instead of getting a roll of foam, I got a giant PVC pipe and just had them cut a giant piece of PVC for me that I would have in my apartment and, roll myself on that. I had the lacrosse balls, the tennis balls, the stick is literally called the stick. And I would take it to class with me, and I would just roll my legs with the stick over and over and over.
It's like a stick with big beads on it. With big beads. Like rolls on
exactly.
Your leg.
Yep. If anybody, that knew me in college is listening to this, during my senior year, you probably saw me walking around campus, carrying that stick everywhere. And just, constant. So I was all about it. And, I believed the four arguments or the 4 points that I brought up at the beginning, but we want to talk about those more today.
I actually think the most common one, well, maybe I'm biased only because this is the one I believed, which was like the fascia discussion, which, by the way, if you know anything about fascia, you're also ahead of the times and ahead of the big wave, because I think it's based off of not getting results, off of doing things that are said to manipulate muscle, like stretching. And a lot of people don't get the results they want from stretching. And So they think, well, there's got to be something else wrong. Oh, it must be my fascia. Okay, so foam rolling helps with fascia. So just in my biased opinion, I kind of think that people associate foam rolling more with like fascial change and then stretching with muscle change.
Well, that's such a great point, because I remember when I first got into foam rolling, it wasn't called foam rolling. It was called self-myofascial release. It was SMR. And I even made instructional how-to videos on how to properly do SMR, and you can find them on YouTube of me on a foam roller going through this whole routine. So that's how into it I was.
But Charlie, you doing that, think about this. You're the perfect example of what so commonly happens in the fitness industry. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the fitness industry is not regulated. Like what Charlie and I do is not regulated, and that's why we really push ourselves to really be ahead of the curve so that we are, providing the safest material and products for our clients and listeners, because we're just not regulated. But there's so much value in fitness that we got to do something. So it's interesting that Charlie just got really passionate about this thing. He probably did minimal research behind it, and he was already making instructional videos. Yep. But, and so if you were to look up on YouTube, you'd think, wow, this guy Charlie Cates, he knows what he's talking about, self-myofascial release. I mean, think about that name. That name is sweet sounding. This has got to work. But little do us consumers know that Charlie has no idea what foam rolling is doing. He probably didn't research it. He maybe went to a 30-minute class online, or maybe he went to a continuing ed one-day class, but it is just not regulated. And now he's this self-proclaimed expert giving advice to people that legitimately need help. And that's a big issue in the fitness world. And so we share this with so much compassion, because we used to be there until we realized, dang, we got such powerful tools with using exercise and all the products that go with exercise, and it is up to us to be responsible with them. And but I thought when you brought that up, that's such a good example of what I was talking about earlier with how these different fitness professionals will just make claims.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to know. Well, it's what is that rooted in? Their own personal experience, or just their biased opinion, or what their own agenda,
for sure,
etc.
Exactly. Okay, so let's dive into this. Let's start with the blood flow aspect, because this is, I think, a rather quick point to discuss. And if you just spend a little bit of time thinking about it, you can realize why, all right, just to be blunt, it doesn't make much sense. Okay, so what would be the reason why blood would flow to an area? Okay, think about in your body. What would be the reason why blood would flow to an area? Let's not talk about from a physiology standpoint. Let's just talk about maybe from a physics standpoint. All right, you're probably thinking, well, that's not much easier than talking about it. But okay, but think about it. All right, so blood flows from areas of what to what? It flows from areas of higher pressure to lower pressure, right?
Right, because it wants equalize.
Exactly, okay? Mm-hmm. So the only reason that blood is going to go to an area is if in that area there's lower pressure, right? That would be, just we can talk about, okay, well, what other, how does that happen? But let's just start with that, all right? There has to be lower pressure in an area in order for blood to flow to it, okay?
Right.
Well, when you're smashing yourself against a foam roller, is it you have less pressure or more pressure there?
Definitely more.
You definitely have more. Okay, so that's curious. That's curious to start. All right. So then let's talk about, all right, well, why or how can you get lower pressure in an area? All right, well, let's keep it simple. There's two ways, okay? One is called vasodilation, which means the blood vessels in that area relax or open up, so then blood is able to flow there easier. Two, there's a higher driving pressure coming from an area that isn't the area you're trying to flow blood to. So namely the heart. The heart starts beating harder, starts beating faster. It increases the driving force, increases the blood pressure, and then it drives it out into the extremities. Okay, so you can have vasodilation in an area, or you can have a higher driving pressure beforehand, or at the start. So the question is, would, again, lying on a piece of foam increase vasodilation in that area? Well, while you're lying on it, probably not. Because again, you're kind of lying with your whole body weight on there. That's just not going to happen. You haven't decreased the pressure in that area. Is it going to increase your heart rate? Well, maybe because you are either creating a stress response where it hurts and you're not liking that.
Your heart starts beating faster.
Exactly. Right. Or there is some kind of maybe, slight activity that's happening while you're rolling yourself.
Yeah, you're like crawling on the ground. So that's a little bit.
Right. So that's a little bit. Okay. So maybe, but another way to increase vasodilation is by creating an inflammatory response. You create an inflammatory response, you're going to get vasodilation in an area. So now here's the thing. An inflammatory response isn't bad, all right? When your muscles contract, they're going to start an inflammatory response. So that's part of, that's part of the muscle contraction process. So, we're all about muscle contraction. So we can't say, oh yeah, we're all about muscle contraction. And they say we'll start the inflammatory process back because those two happen simultaneously, all right? But understand that that may be, if there is some kind of increase in blood flow to an area, it's likely not the smashing of the foam against the side of the leg or the quads or whatever that's doing it. It may be because you're simply starting an inflammatory response. And if that's the case, again, muscle contraction is another thing that can start a low-grade inflammatory response that will get vasodilation to an area. It would seem like we'll just go for a walk, right? Just go for a walk and you'll be able to get a similar type response from a blood flow perspective, or an even greater response from a blood flow perspective. Because one thing that's actually really interesting is if we think about, foam rolling is not massage, but it's well established that massage does not increase blood flow to an area. So how would we then say, okay, well, if something that's relatively similar doesn't, it would just seem to me that it's a bit of a stretch to say, okay, well, it increases blood flow to an area when the mechanisms by which to increase blood flow don't seem to be happening, unless we're saying, well, it does it by starting an inflammatory response, which then creates vasodilation.
Right. It's almost like a lot of points. What you said, Charlie, were really, really good. And it's interesting because a lot of the benefits that we're saying, oh, well, when I do it, it increases blood flow. It's like, well, that's happening when you're going to even lightly exercise, even lightly move. So we can't give the benefit or the change that we might perceive that's happening from foam rolling to give that to blood flow. I was also thinking like there would be, I guess, some blood flow change only because like if you're smashing your leg on like a foam roller, as you said, it would make higher pressure there, right? Because you're pushing on those vessels. But then there's like the release. So then it refills. But it's not like there's actually this, like when we think of blood flow, usually we're thinking of, oh, why would blood flow be good? Well, it's oxygenating, it's taking in and out nutrients, which is not like, oh, remove the blood and then replace the blood. It's actually this like flowing process, which is more of what we would expect from exercise, which is like more of a consistent like exercise thing.
Yeah, right on. So then moving on to the next idea of like, okay, well, it's helping with recovery, in particular removal of lactic acid. Okay, first of all, we need to address this idea of lactic acid, and especially within a human. Okay, you cannot get your pH low enough in the physiological environment of a human to create lactic acid. So within a human, lactic acid does not exist. So the whole idea of, well, we need to get rid of lactic acid, or the burn you feel, it's a lactic acid. Oh, I'm sore because of buildup of lactic acid. There's no lactic acid anywhere. It doesn't exist. Not within you as a human being. Okay, so we can move past that. What does get created is something called lactate. Okay, lactate gets created, and it can get created in abundance, and it gets created by nearly every single cell in your body. Now, the question is, 1, would we want to remove lactate? 2, would smashing ourselves with a piece of foam actually do that? And 3, if it does do that, then what else is it doing? Okay, so first of all, then let's start with the first question is, what is a role of lactate and would we even want to remove it? Okay. All right. So the role of lactate is it is kind of an end product, or I shouldn't say an end product, but it is part of the glycolysis process. All right. So the glycolysis process is a way to produce ATP in your cells, and pyruvate is what gets produced from glycolysis. And then you have enzymes called LDH enzymes that convert pyruvate to lactate. Okay. Well, it can also go backwards where they can take lactate and convert it to pyruvate. Well, pyruvate is something that can either go to your mitochondria and eventually aid in the process of producing ATP, or it can go through glycolysis backwards and get stored as glycogen. So the whole idea of we need to get rid of lactate, well, your body's using lactate to either store energy in the form of glycogen or use it to create energy, if you want to call that, in the form of ATP. So so the whole idea of getting rid of lactate, we wouldn't want to do that, in my opinion, to begin with.
So Charlie, you bring up some good points. And if you weren't following Charlie's energy schemes that he was saying, basically lactate is a byproduct of creating ATP, which is like a molecule of energy. It's like the energy our muscles make. But that lactate can be used to then go to glycogen, which is like a storage of energy molecule, or it can be recycled and then made into more ATP. So what he's saying is it's kind of a good thing for us to have lactate. But in my, again, the fitness industry is a lot of word of mouth and spreading information that maybe is not always true. Especially in the sports world, we blame excessive soreness often to this storage or pooling or not filtering out of lactic acid in our muscles. And someone we know lactic acid doesn't exist, so it is lactate, but we still want to get it out because that's why I'm so sore. But actually, soreness is muscle injury, and soreness is actually a sign that you did an inappropriate workout for your body. And so the solution to if you're doing it because you're sore and you feel like it's because there's lactic acid built up in your body, then that is a sign that instead of using foam rolling to recover from that, you actually should just scale back your workouts just a little bit so that your body can handle it. And there are multiple benefits to doing that, meaning you'll be able to do more, meaning you won't have to recover from the workout. You can go challenge that area again sooner, which will only benefit your body. So a lot of times people put those two together, especially in the sports world. So be mindful of that one because that one can get to be a slippery slope. And Charlie, when you were talking about pH is influenced, by acids and bases. That's what we normally think. There are so many quote unquote levels in our body that our body is so super keen on keeping the most leveled out as possible. One being our temperature, which is why our temperature from day to day when we're working out, it really doesn't fluctuate that much. And that's why it increases a degree or two, and it's kind of a big deal. If you have a fever of 102, that's kind of a big deal. 103, that's only 1 degree. That's also a really big deal. But our acidity, our pH level in our body is another one of those that is very tightly regulated. So if it really did happen that we became these acidic creatures every time we exercise because of all this built up lactic acid, that would be pretty crazy.
For sure. Okay. So then let's talk about, would foam rolling actually get rid of lactate? Okay. So what we need to understand is lactate is a charged molecule, and charged molecules do not cross cell membranes super easily. In fact, there are a number of transporters that live in cell membranes to take lactate from your blood and pull it back into the cells. So despite you wanting to get rid of the lactate, by smashing your body with foam or smashing your body on foam, your body's saying, well, actually, you know what? The way we are designed is to actually pull lactate from the blood into our cells, and it takes a tremendous buildup of lactate within a cell in order for then it to spill over into the blood. All right, because everything, or not everything, but it's mostly designed to go the opposite way, to pull lactate from the blood into the cells. Why? Because again, you can use it in these metabolic processes to either store energy or create energy in the form of ATP, okay? Again, lactate is produced by nearly every single cell in your body. It's not just a muscle thing. Your heart muscles use lactate tremendously efficiently in order to create energy. Your liver uses lactate in order to then create store glycogen. So there is the scope of lactate goes far beyond just your muscle cells and your skeletal muscle cells and what you might be feeling as soreness or what you might be thinking is contributing to soreness or why you're not recovering or whatnot. So because of that, it's like, okay, well, if it is really difficult to get lactate out of a cell, what would have to happen, theoretically, if we were going to apply this pressure to our skin, to our muscles, to our tissue, and essentially smush the lactate out? Like that's kind of the idea, right? I mean, in my head, it's like you might have to nearly like rupture the cell in order to try to get that lactate out if you're just going to smush it out. I don't think that's the best idea.
And if that is how it's happening, you're manipulating all the other byproducts and different enzymes that are in that cell too. It's not just, you can't just say, oh, it's just affecting lactate.
Well, yeah, exactly. Which exactly leads to the last point that I want to bring up is, okay, well, let's say this is actually happening. Let's say you're actually feeling sore because of a buildup of lactate, which isn't the case. Let's say your recovery is poor because of buildup of lactate, which isn't the case. Let's say you can actually put something against your thigh and rub it, over your thigh and, get a decrease in lactate in the cell, which is highly unlikely. We have to also ask, well, what else is going on here? Meaning, could you, why is it just lactate then that's the thing that's moving? What about, like glucose? Right? Like, are you taking glucose from the blood, and is that a way to transport glucose from the blood into the cell? So like you get a drop in your blood glucose when you foam roll, but that's just when you go the one direction, right? Because when you go the opposite direction, you obviously break down glycogen, and then you get this massive increase in blood glucose because it's going back the other way. It's like we can't just say it's happening to one molecule or one substrate and not assume that it would have to be happening to everything else too, if that's the argument we're going to make. So that argument just really doesn't hold water. It doesn't make sense when we start to think about, well, what would have to happen in order for that to happen, and what would be the effect of that happening? It just doesn't seem logical or reasonable.
All right, the next argument that people love to talk about with foam rolling, which also is related to the one they like to say with stretching, is change of range of motion. And this one, I think is like people are hoping to get like some kind of relaxation or elongating effect with using foam rolling, and that's what leads to a change in range of motion. But I want you to think about this, and I think the easiest way to think about this is using a hair tie. So you guys familiar with it? Or a rubber band. If you're not a female, you might not be that familiar with hair ties. But think about a rubber band, and you're holding it between your two fingers, right? It's looped. And if you are foam rolling this rubber band, or I'm going to use it as this is like our demo muscle, you're actually taking something and you're like pushing into the center of it. And if you even think about like the thickness of your leg, I don't know, my leg, I'm not like the most giant of person, but I would say I have maybe 2 inches of tissue around my bone. Maybe my leg is like 4 or 6 inches thick or something like that. Or maybe thicker than that. 8 inches. Let's say 8 inches. Okay, so I got like 4 inches. Let's just talk about my hamstrings. I got like 4-inch thick hamstrings. All right, they are pretty robust back there. So the max amount that I could possibly compress this rubber band until it hits my bone is a maximum of 4 inches. And that's if I use the roller to get all the way to my bone, which obviously we know there's muscle tissue there, so that's not happening. And there's adipose, meaning fat tissue there, so that's not happening. So maybe 2 inches. So I'm compressing this muscle 2 inches, or think about your rubber band. You're like pushing down the center 2 inches. I want you to think about like how much change in length really happened in that rubber band by pushing in the center. Not very much. And then I guess the hope is that it stays that long, or if it's not by putting length into the muscle, which usually people like to use for stretching, just putting length into the muscle, you're hoping that you're relaxing the muscle enough that it no longer is inhibiting motion in some way.
Yeah, I really like that visual because what you're saying is right on. What's interesting about much of the research on foam rolling is that the conclusions that are drawn, whether the statistics are done correctly or not, I'm not a statistics person, to be honest. So I've taken a lot of statistics courses. I don't fully understand statistics, but I have looked at it enough to realize that most research, the statistics are done improperly. But let's just give every piece of research that we've looked at the benefit of the doubt and assume that they've run their statistics correctly. And so everything that they're saying is 100% accurate. The results that they're saying are they're saying statistically significant improvements in range of motion. But here's the question we have to ask is why? Why? And this leads into the next point of like the deformation of tissue. And then it kind of leads to one of our concluding arguments about what foam rolling might actually be doing. So yes, could doing foam rolling lead to an increase in joint mobility, joint range of motion, flexibility, whatever you want to call it? Possibly. That's probably one of the stronger arguments made by much of the research. However, there are some big issues that come up with that, and we'll get to those at the end. But what we want to touch on now is the whole kind of deformation of tissue, and specifically the deformation of fascia.
So one thing that foam rolling seems to really attract is this conversation of changing fascial length. And fascia, let's just talk quickly about what fascia is, because I think a lot of people have heard the word. A lot of people probably, even participate in activities that change your fascia, but you're not really all that sure about what fascia is. So fascia has always been in your body. Just because you know about it, it's always been there. And what it is connective tissue that is not designed to contract, lengthen, shorten. It's not designed to be active tissue. Kind of like Charlie and I talk about muscle all the time and how much it changes. It gets longer, it gets shorter, it contracts, it can stay super tight, it can be super relaxed. Fascia does not share these properties. It's kind of like almost like your bed sheet. Like your bed sheet can wrap all around your body, but it's not changing length. But depending on how you're laying in there, will change what it's looking like. So if your fascia is laying on top of your quad, it's kind of a different shape than the one that's in and around your hamstring, which is a little bit different than the one that's in and around your abs. But they're all doing the same thing. Like the tissue is still the same like components. It's not stretchy. It doesn't get longer. It doesn't get shorter. It doesn't contract. It doesn't have like motor units like muscles do, where muscles are designed to like really respond to the brain's commands. It doesn't have that. And so one thing that already, without looking at like research on what happens to our fascia, what comes to my mind is like, okay, why would you want to stretch or lengthen this material that is not designed to do that? And the biggest feedback that I see all the time is people are like, well, it's tight. And I'm like, well, you're feeling tight, but how can you know that's the fascia? Because the fascia is like completely enveloping and spiderwebbed into your entire muscle. Like there's no way for us to differentiate where that sensation is coming from, because it is just completely intertwined with the muscle. And if your fascia is tight for some reason, for example, the IT band is a very famous fascial tissue. Actually, fascia is the same tissue as tendon. It just lives in a different spot. Like tendon is the connective tissue that takes the muscle and connects it to bone. Fascia is this same connective tissue that just continues through and around the muscle. So if this stuff is tight, if this connective tissue is tight, it's because something's pulling on it. And remember, the only thing the only thing in your bodies that can pull on this connective tissue is muscle. So it's kind of like if you're pulling your bed sheet really, really tight, the only reason it's really tight is because you're yanking on it. So you have to relax. We're not going to go in and, make little micro tears or start massaging the bed sheet, because it's like, well, this bed sheet, maybe it'll start ripping eventually, which we'll talk about how that probably wouldn't happen with the fascia. But, it's not the tightness in the fascia isn't the cause, because it can't tighten except for if something else is yanking on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the IT band, because I think that's definitely one of the more popular areas that people know about, and definitely one of the more popular areas for people to foam roll. And I think another area that's fascia related that people do some kind of rolling with is the plantar fascia, or the bottoms of the feet. Yeah, for sure. And
those two ones are like the celebs of fascia.
Absolutely. And why that is particularly intriguing to me, there's this really neat paper called Three-Dimensional Mathematical Model for Deformation of Human Fascia in Manual Therapy. And so you can look it up. And you can read through it.
That was the nerdiest title I've ever heard.
I know, right? But it's it's a pretty cool paper. What I want to talk about are the results of this paper, because when you read through these results, you realize that lying your body on a piece of foam, that's not doing much to the fascia, if anything. Okay, so what these authors found is that in the case of the fascia lata, which feeds into the IT band, becomes IT band. So a predicted normal load, or in other words, like a compressive force, which would be like your body smashing into foam, of 925 kilograms, and a tangential force, or like kind of like a shearing force, kind of pulling, of 460 kilograms are needed to produce even 1% compression and 1% shear. Such forces are far beyond the physiologic range of manual therapy. All right, so let's talk about that. So 925 kilograms. I'm just going to pull up my kilogram to pound converter real quick.
Because this was the pressure you need to push like straight in.
Exactly.
To actually make any change.
So 925 kilograms. Guess how many pounds that is?
Well, I know it's a conversion of like 2.2.
It's 2,039 pounds.
So literally, if I laid my IT band on a foam roller and I actually wanted to change my fascia, my body would literally get crushed before, because I would have to put 2,000 pounds, you said?
Yeah, is over 2,000 pounds. So like I'm
on top of my body.
Exactly. So I'm roughly 225 pounds. I would need nearly 10 times the amount of my body weight to get a 1% compression in that IT band area, in that fascia lata area. Exactly. Wow. But here's the thing. The other thing you have to consider is that you're putting a piece of foam, which is going to disperse it. Why? Because the foam is malleable, which means instead of there being like a single point for the surface area, the more malleable it becomes, the wider the surface area, which means the more dispersed the force gets. So even if you're lying your entire body weight on the foam roller, you're not actually putting the entire weight of your body on that one spot, because some of it is dispersed. And even if you were, you would still need 10 times that, roughly, depending on how much you weigh, 10 times that in order to create a 1% change in the tissue itself.
I would be scared that my femur would snap in half.
Would probably... Well,
actually, the foam roller would crush.
Oh, the foam roller would be obliterated.
Would crush. And then I probably wouldn't smash my IT bands.
That's
I would
true.
hope that my femurs are stronger than a foam roller, but who knows? If I was using PVC pipe, I don't know.
Right? Exactly. So, femur stronger than foam roller. Yeah, that's definitely happening for sure. Okay.
Okay, so what we're saying here is that with just a straight pushing in on your IT band or any fascia, you would have to have over 2,000 pounds. If you're in the U.S., 2,000 pounds, because that's what we understand, of pressure to make any amount of change to this fascial tissue. Okay, got it.
And that's just if you're pushing straight in. Now, if there's a rolling component
Right,
as
because
well.
we roll back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. That means that your pushing in is likely going to be a little bit less because you have to take some of your body weight off so you can actually move it back and forth, right? It's not like you're driving yourself down and then driving into you're not getting that friction of the foam roller going, across. So it's going to be less. So it's going to be less than what your body weight is in that regard as well. So the idea that, you're going to, roll out your IT band or make any kind of structural change to your IT band or your fascia lata or anything like that, that's not happening. Not with a foam roller, not with a PVC pipe, not if you do what I did at one point in time, which was do, rolling on a barbell, because why not?
Wow.
Yeah, right?
You're crazy.
Okay.
Well, by the way, remember I said in the beginning, it's very painful. Like I used to think it was very painful with just my leg. And at the time, I think I was sporting, 120 pounds. So I don't know, maybe I had, 50 pounds on this thing. I don't know how anyone would tolerate even more. Again, sure. I think the foam roller would squish.
Right? Okay. Well, it definitely would. 100% it would. You look at the foam rollers over time. What do? Do they stay perfectly cylindrical? No, they're all deformed.
Yeah,
all deformed. That's why you have to get more and more dense ones. Okay. So that's the fascia lata. What about the plantar fascia, which is another hot topic area? And you get the lacrosse ball, you roll out the bottoms of your feet. That's supposed to be, help you to release the plantar fascia or whatever. Guess what? Guess how many pounds of force would be needed in order to get that 1% compression of the fascia lata?
Double? I think double.
Well, it was 852 kilograms, which again, put into the converter here, is 1,878 pounds of force.
Wow.
Being put into the bottom of your foot in order to get a 1% change of the tissue due to compression.
So again, just impossible to do. Like you literally could not do that.
No, exactly.
So this idea that we're using a foam roller or a ball or whatever to deform the fascia is just really crazy.
Yeah. So with these osseous rows, we found that for plantar fascia, a normal load of 852 kilograms and a tangential force of 424 kilograms are needed to produce even 1% compression and 1% shear. These forces are far beyond the physiologic range of manual therapy, as were the forces that were needed to produce compression and shear in fascia lata. Thus, we conclude that the dense tissues of the fascia lata and the plantar fascia both remain very stiff under compression and shear during manual therapy. And manual therapy, we're also going to throw in foam rolling for that as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think, I don't know if you were planning to bring this up, but one of the ways I always remember fascia is that I know there's probably something written online about this, what it is, but I think it was I was told it has towing capacity. Like if you took the tissue and wrapped it up to a toe, you could be like, yeah. Oh, a hitch. I meant not a toe. A hitch. You could literally drive two trucks apart, and that tissue is going to be very resistant to change. And I think we often think that this tissue is very subjective to change.
Right.
And it's just a really not correct, perception of this tissue. I think we think oftentimes that, and I think this comes from the flexibility model, that our insides should be just so fluid and squishy but actually our tissues, our body is designed to really tolerate a lot of force. And so these tissues, they are not just going to start melting under pressure. And it's actually a really good thing. It's just interesting, when I started taking personal training classes and started learning about the internal view, about, you might be lifting 10 pounds on the inside, but because that muscle is so much closer to the joint, your muscle, meaning your fascia, your tendon, is having to tolerate hundreds of more pounds than what you're holding in your hand. So it's interesting because these tissues, again, we're designed to tolerate a lot of force. So if we're trying to use force to actually deform or manipulate tissue, it is just not happening. It is not what's happening. No. And if you're feeling benefits or changes, it's not because you just changed the fascia. I know there's also information that talks about how often you have to even manipulate fascia to even change like fascial direction. And it's just stuff that's like impossible. I mean, unless it's like your full-time job and you do it for like 50 years, like then you might be changing fascia. But most people do it when they're in like physical therapy twice a week for 3 months,
right?
And that's just not enough. So it's definitely not your fascia that's changing because of your foam rolling experience.
So let's talk about what might be happening with foam rolling, okay? If it's unlikely that it's increasing blood flow, if it's, not removing lactate that you even want to, and therefore maybe not improving recovery, if that was something that would contribute to better recovery, that's a whole nother discussion. If it is, changing range of motion, but not through manipulation of fascial tissues, what might it be doing? Well, one thing that is pretty consistent among a number of papers is a decrease in EMG activity of musculature that has been foam rolled. Okay. In other words, your muscles aren't getting as much signal after as they are before. Now, what's interesting about a lot of these papers is a lot of these papers conclude then that, well, you know what? Now your muscles are more efficient because they don't need as much signal to work. And I see that and I read it as, wow, your body now has to figure out a whole bunch of more ways to compensate because your muscles can't contract as well because they're not getting as much signal. So what might be happening is you're not necessarily changing the structure of muscle, but you are potentially manipulating the input to the muscles, which can inhibit their ability to contract. Now, again, that may lead to transient changes in range of motion, transient changes in mobility, but what's the cost of that? And that's something that we talk a lot about.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this podcast, as Charlie and I have been chatting about some of the stuff that might be happening, might not be happening, you might be feeling like kind of emotional and angry at us because like we might be talking about stuff that you don't want to think about. Like because guess what? People foam roll and they often feel better after. And Charlie and I have zero basis to tell you that that's false or not true because your sensation of discomfort is your sensation. So oftentimes when people foam roll, they feel better afterwards. Or just similar to people after they stretch or get a massage, they feel better afterwards. The question always then becomes, well, does that last? What is the cost of that feeling better? And what Charlie is saying with this decreased neural drive is that what if this is the scenario? Okay, you've got whatever going on in your body. Everyone's got their own scenario. And you have certain muscles that are feeling extra tight. Or maybe they are tight, right? Your brain is sending more signal to these muscles, and these muscles are kind of holding some tension. In Charlie and I's opinion, it's always there for a reason. Like we don't mistakenly hold tension in certain muscles. But anyways, we have tension there. Obviously, it means kind of uncomfortable. We'd rather not have it there. So we're going to take this foam roller and we're going to probably foam roll this area, whether it's our T-band or, your SI joint or your hand, whatever. All the areas you can possibly IT-band, all the areas you can IT-band, all the areas you can foam roll. And afterwards, you might feel, wow, this area actually feels a little bit less tight. Well, remember, one of the consistent findings in the research is that there's less neural drive, meaning like the brain is not talking to that area quite as much. It's not asking that area to signal quite as much. And you might think like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, it seemed like it was like kind of overly talking to that area, and now it's talking to that area less. But the problem with that story, at least in Charlie and I's perspective, and with us being so accustomed to using the MAT mindset, is that tightness is always present for a reason. And if you remove tightness by like decreasing that neural drive, by physically manipulating the muscle, chances are that tightness will come back in that tissue, or your body will find another area to take over for the tightness that it wanted to be in that area that you just removed, or you just made so that muscle couldn't hold that tightness. So because of that, we have to be really mindful of how we use foam rolling. I always tell my clients, if you're going to do something that makes muscles work less well or less good or less efficiently, like foam rolling, stretching, or massage, you want to make sure you're not going to do anything afterwards, because you're preparing your muscles to be good at being muscles less. Like you're telling them, don't do your job. So you really don't want to do active stuff after you've foam rolled, because your body is more at risk for injury because it's less prepared to contract and generate force. So keep that in mind. The other big driving factor that, if you listen to any of our podcasts, Charlie and I talk about, is to also be always thinking, well, why is this muscle tight? And Charlie and I believe that muscle tightness is secondary to weakness, which means that if you have tightness present in an area, it's not there because of lack of stretching and lack of foam rolling and lack of trigger pointing and lack of massaging. It's usually there because of lack of strength somewhere else. Like, our bodies are designed to do this thing called compensate. So when your body feels like, oh, there's weakness here, we got to tighten up another area, because that's what we can do to handle this weakness, because our body always wants to be ready to tolerate force and ready to move. And so if we are deleting that tightness, but the body intentionally put it there, again, we'll usually set up some other stuff or just return the tightness, which is why people that usually foam roll a lot, or like every day or twice a day or whatever. So our suggestion always is, before you foam roll or in conjunction with foam rolling, you should also always be looking for the why. Like, why did it get tight? And that's one beautiful thing about muscle activation techniques, is that it is always searching for the why. I'm sure there's other techniques out there that Charlie and I are unfamiliar with that may search for the why as well. But MAT, that is like the main goal, is like, where is your body unable to contract? And whenever there is an inability to contract somewhere, it is more than likely that you're experiencing a symptom of muscles that are like over contracting, because they're trying to say, oh, this place can under contract, but don't worry, I can contract, so I'll just do it a whole bunch. And so you get this unbalancedness. And whenever you're doing foam rolling to try to elicit this type of response, this like relaxation response or an ease of symptom response, we have to be mindful that, yay, I'm glad you feel better. I want you feeling good. But we also have to always be questioning, okay, well, why was that there? And did I just do something that's going to maybe cost me more than the benefit that I just got?
And Julie, those are just awesome points. And I think it really leads us to our concluding point, which is, look, from a physiologic standpoint, it's pretty up in the air of what foam rolling may be doing, may not be doing. You know, part of the challenge with a lot of the papers on foam rolling, there's no like clearly defined standard of practice for foam rolling, meaning like how long you're doing it for, how much pressure, the speed at which you're doing it, the areas at which you're doing it. All of those variables are not well controlled, and so there's a lot of kind of mixed results that come about from foam rolling. But one thing is pretty darn clear, and that is a lot of people really like it. And so whether or not it's actually doing anything from a mechanistic standpoint, from a physiologic standpoint, it could just be a really strong placebo for you. And believe me, there's nothing wrong with having placebos, okay? Look, I think most of us have placebos in our lives that allow us to kind of perform better or to, be our best selves or whatever we want to call it. And foam rolling is one of those things that you feel like you need to do in order to feel like you're going to perform better or feel better or whatever. Cool, go ahead and do it. But that doesn't mean it's benign. It doesn't mean that it's without consequence, because one thing that has been clearly demonstrated is that it can decrease the input to your muscles and decrease their ability to contract, which means if your muscles can't contract as well, they can't support your joints as well, which means other muscles are going to have to work harder, which means you are potentially creating more compensation, potentially creating more imbalances, potentially actually decreasing your range of motion long term if you continue to assault your body in this way. But if it's something that you feel like is making you better, then at the end of the day, feel free to keep doing it. Just understand that there may be consequences that come along with it, and much of the touted benefits of foam rolling really don't hold water when we start to think about them from a mechanistic standpoint, from a biologic standpoint, and from what would actually have to happen in order to get this kind of benefit standpoint.
Charlie, I love that you brought that up, because I think I don't know, I've heard this said a couple times, but I think it's really true, is that, you and I study how muscles work all the time. We talk about it all the time. But at the end of the day, you are the expert at your own body, and you are the one that gets to live in your own body. And if when you foam roll, you're like, dang, I feel so much benefit. I don't feel like I'm not noticing that there's any cost for me, and I like it. Well, great, do it. I think that there is so much power in doing activities that you find healthy, that you think are healthy. It's not what Charlie and I find that are healthy. But the issue arises is when you're doing it and it's causing some negative side effects. That's where we want to step in and say like, hey, we can offer some other stuff and some explanation as of why. Because I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in pain or discomfort, or you couldn't do something physically with your body that you wanted to do and you couldn't find an answer of why, and everyone is telling you the same answer and it's not working for you, that is frustrating. So if it was me, try it out. And, see what happens for you. I would be very gentle with it. I find that because I have trained my body to like be very MAT focused, I find that I get like a lot of negative side effects from things like stretching and foam rolling. You might not, but also I get weekly MAT, so I have very minimal symptoms walking around. Most people walk around with a whole bunch of symptoms all the time and think it's normal. So I feel like I have a pretty decent like baseline of like, oh, okay, I feel actually good walking around, which I don't think most people do. But just be mindful of that. And I do want to just emphasize that if it's working for you, please keep doing it. If it's not working for you, that's okay too. It doesn't work for everyone. And if you're looking for other solutions, there are more out there. Definitely try out muscle activation techniques. Definitely try out, for real, consistent resistance training. Charlie and I have so many podcasts about that. And people think that it's mostly like for muscle building and like being healthy. But it's also for like feeling good. Like legit good resistance training should make your body feel and function well. And it should not be like wearing and tearing on your body. On that note, do you mind if I bring this up now?
No, I don't mind at all. A
lot of people have been listening to our podcast and they want some like accountability, some like interaction with us. And we just wrapped up something called the One Workout Away Challenge. It ended on September 26th and we had such great feedback. And we also have like a deadline cutoff, so you can't sign up after the event starts. And so many people miss the deadline. So we're starting a new one. It starts on October 25th. And that is Sunday, October 25th. We're going to go for 4 weeks. It's called the One Workout Away Challenge. And this one is going to wrap up the week before Thanksgiving. All you need is a Facebook page because it is held on like a private Facebook group. So you have to be able to access Facebook. But anyways, our goal is going to be to teach you how to exercise so that you can live a healthy lifestyle. I know a lot of like exercise groups and stuff are all about either weight loss or getting shredded, etc. Ours is about using exercise to build your health. Anyways, we want to teach you how to keep exercising through the holidays because we know that is probably the toughest time to exercise. So anyways, if you're interested in that, please go to owa.matschaumburg.com. We'll also put it in the show notes, but I did want to highlight that because that is one of the most powerful tools that you have is using your resistance training to improve the function of your body, which I think that if people are using exercise appropriately, a lot of these things that we use to manipulate our bodies wouldn't even be a question. Like we wouldn't even be searching for them because we wouldn't have those aches and pains in the first place. Exactly. And if you are looking for a pretty awesome video on foam rolling, feel free to search out the video that I did with, a bald-headed Charlie Cates circa 2009. Oh my gosh, your videos are so funny. Feel free to look that up and check out some awesome foam rolling techniques in that regard. Yeah, you can make fun of Charlie. So it's so funny. Every once in a while, Charlie will bring up these old videos. He's like, I used to think this was how exercise was. So cool. I'm so cool. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're ridiculous. But on a serious note, while you're online, think about sharing this episode with somebody. Who do you know that has been doing a lot of foam rolling or is wondering whether they should be foam rolling? Send this episode over to them so they can hear our viewpoints on some pros and cons of foam rolling and possibly make a more informed decision for themselves. In addition to that, if you wouldn't mind, head on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review.
it helps people find this podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.